The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Lighting Controls Podcast. We have another fantastic episode for you today, but before we get into the conversation, let me take a minute to remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association, and now Light Fair as well. We're excited that Light Fair is coming back after its little hiatus, and we will see you guys there in the spring.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. We've got all of our episodes, a newsfeed, merch store, and information on the new training certification by NAILD, so you should check it out. But until then, let's get into this conversation. So today we have a special guest, Shelley. Shelley, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
Yes, so I'm Dr. Shelley James. I'm a lighting design strategy consultant. So that means that I work very often with a range of organizations, institutions on how they can use light and lighting to support outcomes for patients. I work with residential healthcare. I work in schools for special needs. I work in workplace design. I work in inclusive design. So all the different ways that we can build bridges between end users and lighting designers and specifiers and scientists and controls people. So that's what I do.
Well,
I'm also a
for joining
TEDx
us.
speaker. I'm also a TEDx speaker. I'm an author. I'm a member of the Well Advisory. I teach on a number of courses around the world. So I have a multidisciplinary practice.
I mean, that's awesome. And again, thank you so much for joining us. It's really fantastic to have you on this show. You definitely have a lot of experience and knowledge in this industry. And so, I think one of the things that was really interesting about what you said about what you do was bridging between specifiers and end users, which is something that the lighting controls world, from all the feedback that Ron and I get to hear, is not really there. There's not really a bridge between the two. And so, do you mind just opening a little window into how does one create that bridge?
That's a really great question. And as you say, it's something that doesn't happen really often enough. And because that doesn't happen, we end up with a real gap between performance on paper and performance in use. And if anybody's ever been in an office where you've sat for too long and then lights go out and you have to kind of stand up and do a jig to get the lights to go on, or you've waited in an emergency ward with somebody under bright lights at 11 o'clock at night, or you've seen a pharmacist trying to read a label on a bottle, all those ways that we find that even though these things are performing on paper correctly, actually in real use, they're really failing everybody, not only the people using them, but also the environmental impact of these things. So the way I work is that more and more end user groups come to me. So I'm working with a residential healthcare provider. I'm working with a big utilities company here in the UK, and they said, we can see there's a gap between our desire for the way the building performs and the way that we are being invited to purchase or procure light. So how can we build that bridge? And what's the evidence that we have for spending a bit more, particularly spending a bit more upfront on the design and specification? So that seems to be a growing understanding among end users that they might be missing something. They're shopping and they're paying, but they're not getting value. So that's how that works.
Yeah, I think that's great. We really don't do a good service of communicating from our side of things to the end users so that they can understand. I mean, a perfect example is just picking light bulbs, and it's like, what does daylight white mean? And it's like, okay, yeah, let's talk about color temperature. But so how does what's the next step if somebody comes to you and says, okay, I need help, I don't know what I'm talking about? Where do you go from there?
Well, in the same way that if somebody came to you as a specialist and said, I need a head, I know I need to do something, but then you go, well, what do you want it to do? How easy do you want it to be to take care of? What else matters to you? Do you want to look great on camera? Do you want to look great in the swimming pool? What does it need to do for you on a day-to-day basis? And how much are you prepared to spend? How much time and energy do you have to take care of it in the back end? And if somebody proposes something to you which involves blow drying it every day and using a bunch of products when you're an athlete, you go, that looks fine, but actually it's not for me. So I think the first thing that I do is spend time with clients and their clients to say, what does good look like for you? What does value look like for you? And you can very often then work backwards into bringing together a team of lighting designers, specifiers, and very often scientists. I work often with MSc students. We build projects to develop some little performance metrics which say, you asked for this is how this is going to work. And in a way, it builds in post-occupancy evaluation into the project up front, because you can say, let's work out what we want this thing to do. What would good look like? And how can we judge that so that it keeps everybody honest, actually, as the project goes on and budgets get squeezed and time gets squeezed and everybody just wants to leave because they want to hand over the keys and move on to the next. If you've actually got an evaluation built in, hard baked into the system, then you're more likely to go back and fine tune it. And very often that's where the value really comes, is what having delivered the haircut, somebody knows how to take care of it.
Interesting. So I'm curious, when you get involved on a project, is your focus more in regards to the lighting itself, like the lighting design, or more into the control side, or how often do you dip into controls if you're more focused on the individual task, the lighting, the needs of that space, that individual?
I think in today's world, and you guys will know at least as well as I do, the light bulb is really it's like the wheels on the car. It's just the beginning of your relationship with that system, and we need to take a systems approach. So you might have a light. Who's in charge of controlling that light? How does that work? And how can you optimize the relationship between the building control, so the bigger meta control, and the personal control? Because we need those different levels and layers of interaction in order to deliver a truly robust, user-centered, but also kind of financially effective system too. So you can't do one without the other, I would suggest. The minute you put a light bulb in there, you need to know what you're doing. When it comes on, what does it do? So that's got to be part of the system.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really great approach to lighting design, and something that we've heard by several groups. There are definitely lighting designers out there who are like, whoa, no, lighting controls, like that's out of my depth. And I think, to your point, it's like, well, yeah, but how are you controlling that light then if you don't do the lighting controls? So when it comes to that kind of perspective, how do you find the right control system? Like, here in North America, we love our brand specific lighting control systems. Across the pond, it's a little bit more agnostic. So, what does that conversation look like? Where do you come from with that?
So what we do, I mostly get involved with the narrative. So what do we want it to do? How do we create a story that, as you would specify a car or anything else, or a washing machine, what do we want it to do? What does the shopping list look like? What are our bottom lines and what are our nice to haves? So you might want an airbag on the car. That's a no-brainer. Seatbelts, that's a no-brainer. The super duper trims on the wheels. Okay, maybe we can do that. And there's going to be a trade-off. And I think that value engineering has a bad name, but actually, you need that negotiation between what is really the bottom line important and what is sort of an extra. And very often, anybody who's passionate about something will try and kind of add a bit of geeky extra. And actually, we need to keep it real. We need to keep it very close to what value looks like for the end user. So I think that controls narrative is absolutely critical, and that the client is really clear what they are signing up for, and actually, and they have enough information from the lighting designer and the controls team and the smart buildings team to really make sure they're buying something which they can stick up for in a budget meeting with red pens. So if that makes sense. So, and then I think you mentioned about kind of proprietary systems or open systems, and everybody I speak to now is more and more keen on an open system where not only do the clients have more choice going forward about how they maintain that system, because you don't want to be signing up for, particularly if you are a residential care provider without much money, you might scrape together the budget for a capital project to renovate or to retrofit something, or maybe even a new build. But you don't want to have to pay thousands of dollars every year for somebody to come around with a clipboard and upgrade your system. You need that independence. So, and I think so that's one thing. I think the other thing is that as this is such a fast moving sector, that to sign up for one protocol, not only for delivering information to the luminaire, but also harvesting data from the luminaire, to sign up for one system and be locked into their particular research paradigm or their particular product development paradigm, I think is problematic. And I think it also doesn't encourage innovation, because the people who have locked in the subscriptions have no incentive to do anything innovative. So I think that it keeps everybody honest.
Yeah, no, I think we definitely understand that argument. So one thing I don't think we touched on, Shelley, is where are you based out of? Because I think that may drive some of the conversation for our listeners, having an understanding of where you are currently based.
So I live in the southwest of England. I live by the sea, and I came here actually through lockdown, and this whole journey for me began from a head injury, which led to a journey into academia, and then I became an electrician. I set up a light library, and then through lockdown found myself out here by the sea, swimming in the sea every day, and realizing just how important it is, but also how few people understand what that really means. So I'm living a life in the open air mostly.
Yeah. It's super important, right? Because we talk about different protocols, and things across the pond from us are slightly different and a little easier, I think, in some regards. People in North America are very stuck on sole source solutions. And part of that is driven by the rep market and the path to market from manufacturers. There's not a lot of open source. There's not a lot of information sharing. So people do tend to be locked in. So they look at familiar manufacturers who maybe have a good track record, who have been around for a long time, because that's exactly the problem they don't want to run into. They don't want 2 years from now, 3 years from now, to find out that the system's completely obsolete. The manufacturer's gone away. There's no more support, and there's nothing they can do, and they've got to start over again. So we do have a handful of large manufacturers who we see time and time again because of this. And until we start to see more of a shift to more open source, unfortunately in North America, we are kind of locked in with, manufacturer provided solutions, which can certainly make it difficult for us.
I think you're right. And I think part of the difficulty is this de-risking. Nobody wants to buy something that is going to be out of date, or they'd actually rather pay more to de-risk, because they're future-proofing themselves in some way. But I do think that more and more there is a more and more movement towards an international model where not only are we looking at the building and the campus and the city scale, but also the international scale. So some of the big organizations are looking at data harvesting and benchmarking across across an international estate. And I think that those will be the leaders who have the leverage and the bandwidth to decide to do something differently, and that will lead the way. And I'm pretty confident that that's going to happen, because the opportunity cost, particularly when we look at smart buildings and data harvesting and some of the other imperatives that are coming through to not only support environmental impact, but also human performance outcomes too, as we begin to understand that more. I think that building protocols or smart building protocols which are going to support some of that other diversity is going to become even more important. So looking backwards isn't a solution in my view.
Well, so I'm going to shift gears just a tiny bit because there's something else that you get involved in that we haven't really touched on a whole lot in this podcast, but I think is worth talking about because it is such a huge buzz term, is human-centric, circadian entrainment, whatever you want to, categorize it, however you want to lawyer speak it, whatever this is, like what are we talking about when we're talking about that kind of lighting?
Yeah. Good question. I mean, you could say, what other kind of lighting is there? I mean, there's humans. Car parks don't need lighting. Buildings don't need lighting. We need lighting. So you could say that it's kind of a tautology, a no-brainer. All lighting is human-centric lighting. So then let's unpack that a bit and say that there are different effects of light and lighting. One of them is to do with behaviors. So we know that when you walk into a space which looks softer and warmer, you tend to behave differently than in a space which looks brighter and more hygienic. We tend to eat more dessert in one than the other. We tend to donate more money in one than another. There are all kinds of things which so there's a kind of behavioral response thing. And you could say that that's a human-centric dimension because you are inviting humans to behave in the sense of a space being spacious or enclosed or secluded. All those things are in the gift of lighting controls, actually, because you can use light, modulate the way that light is being distributed at any one time to shift the mood in a space. So that's one dimension of human-centric lighting. Another is the way that people's brains work differently. And so if you're thinking about creating lighting which is supportive to people who are photosensitive or who are extremely sensitive to other sensory modalities, we know that certain kinds of light tends to increase sensitivity to sound or to touch or to smell. So you can use light as an inclusive tool as well as that behavioral or sort of nudging tool. And then the other dimension of human-centric lighting is what we might call the hormonal or the biological response, which is that blue light, those sky blue wavelengths particularly, but actually all bright light, is like a cup of coffee for your brain. And particularly so bright light in the evening is going to wake you up, and it's going to wake you in the same way that sound in the evening sounds louder than sound during the day. If you've ever lain awake at night listening to which seemed like a horrible monster climbing up the stairs, and you just realize that it's just the normal creaking of your stairs.
Right.
So because the thresholds for sensitivity shift over the course of the day and into the night. So bright light in the evening is going to wake you up. Anyway, the other thing that it will do, so that's just sort of a pure alerting response. And then we know that, so that's to do with just the alerting, and we know that also supports mood. So that's why sad lamps work, for example. That's just kind of a coffee sugar hit. Right. And then the final one, which is what we might call circadian, or helps to set your body clock. Your body is looking for a signal of what it needs to do next, and it will deliver. Every single cell in your body has a timer. So if you're thinking about your digestive system, you want to make there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens to get you ready for a meal. And so your body is looking for a signal that it's time to wake up, and an hour after wake up, you're going to feel hungry. And then at different times of the day, that cycle of bright light into softer, warmer light and then into darkness turns the flywheel of the clockwork of your body clock to keep it on track. And if you don't get a strong enough contrast between light during the day and light in the evening and darkness, you start to drift because your body doesn't have that information to anticipate the next thing to do. So it's looking for light cues. And again, controls are so critical because you can have this light fitting and have it deliver different things to your brain at different times of the day. So that's the circadian is a subset of human-centric lighting, which is really lighting designed to support human outcomes, whatever they need to
Right.
be.
Well, and I think that that's a really great response to that because, there's so much market speak when it comes
Oh
to
yeah.
human-centric lighting that focuses so specifically on one piece of that, and not even a piece that you were talking about. What's funny is not once did you mention color, except for when you were talking about daylight blue. You didn't talk about changing the color spectrum of your lighting for human-centric lighting, quote unquote. And that's because intensity trumps color. If you are giving the body enough illuminance for the eyes to receive and be able to adapt, then that is all you need. You don't need that. And in fact, a lot of this quote unquote human centric lighting that gets marketed tends to be focused on same intensity, different color, rather than different intensity, different color. And so that, but I think to your point, like pulling it back and saying, well, what is human centric lighting? What are you doing for the people? Like you said, car parks on their own don't need lighting, but when we're navigating the car park, we need lighting. But we're also not spending our entire day in a car park unless you're like car park attendant or something. So, like, it is like, what is the space? How are people using these spaces? What is the goal with that quote unquote human centric lighting? And so I think really pulling us back and asking that question is a really critical juncture for us to avoid miscommunication.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things that smart lighting can do is, so you're in the car park, or I'm working on a housing association at the moment, and you come out of your door or out of a lift, and it's a corridor, or you come out of the lift in the basement of the car park. You don't know which ways. You could use
Right.
lighting to say your car's over here, or this is the exit. There are lots of ways that you can use lighting to signal different kinds of behaviors, or to guide people, which I think we overlook. The whole thing just goes bright on, and it
Right.
goes bright on at the same level, but night or day. And actually, if you just come out of, you could save so much energy simply by adjusting the light levels and adjusting the signals to be appropriate for the time of the day and the activity too.
Well, and so you touched on this briefly, and I am curious how these conversations go, because there is pushback whenever somebody says, well, instead of going bright on, bright off, let's have some smoothness to this. Let's have some transition. Let's have some sensing technology. And the pushback is, well, that's expensive. I can't afford that.
Yes. But so it is more expensive. But if you think about human comfort, I mean, what's the building for? And if you think about the cost of the people, or the cost of attracting people to your shopping center, or to your restaurant, or to your hotel, or to your office, or to your school, particularly older adults, or people who are anxious, that flip on off it's a scare signal, isn't it? It goes straight to your fight or flight response.
Right.
So something which comes on softly and then goes off softly. However, and what's also interesting is that in the old days, maybe that was much more expensive, but I challenge those who say it's outrageously more expensive. It may be an incremental cost, but in the scheme of the development, in exchange for the immunity that you will get, I think it's cost and value. I think it could be a false economy.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see that cost range shrink, right? Of what it takes to put a control system in to achieve these tasks, these looks. But what we are seeing more and more of is the need for someone to program these more and more complicated systems, right? The need for an integrator, the need for a third party, if it's not a manufacturer-based solution. And the pushback that we've heard from a lot of people is that, integrators are too expensive. That's too expensive. The control system's not so bad, but now I have to add this whole extra person I wasn't planning on. There's this added cost. How do you navigate that conversation as you get into these discussions? Because in order to achieve everything you were just talking about, you need to have a really good controls person or controls team to actually make all of that happen.
Agreed. And I think the people's idea about how they're shopping hasn't quite caught up. I mean, you buy a salad but not the dressing. It's like, okay, so how's that going to work? I mean, that's a daft example, but or you buy an expensive car, or you buy a gym membership, or you go to a gym and you're standing there surrounded by all this amazing kit. You're not going to pay somebody to show you how to use it. I think the other thing that can be that, and that's where the manufacturer, those closed systems can be problematic, because you're locked in to that particular programming cost model. And I think that's another argument for choosing, essentially doing an a la carte, choosing the bits that you need. Because the other thing that often happens is that people buy an over-engineered package. If it's a car park, what does it really need? And if you're into an ecosystem, you're likely to buy the basic package, or the premium, or professional, and you get a whole bunch of bells and whistles which don't serve you and actually end up being much more cumbersome and harder to manage. So I think I would argue that if you're going to the restaurant, you need to be able to afford the full meal, or go to a different place, because I think and think setting expectations. And I think lighting designers need to be more confident to engage with that technical specification network, because not only is it an amazing professional opportunity and it's so interesting, it's so exciting to learn about this stuff, but also they can really add value and continue to earn their place at the table, because as long as they say, oh, I just do the designs, I just do the pretty stuff on the edges, they get value engineered out, because and the interesting thing, I find it's very often a gender mixture as well. You find that the very often some amazing female lighting designers, and then you see the blokes come in with the spreadsheets, and I think it's very important for the lighting designers and the creatives to hang on in there through the discomfort of some technical conversations, to make sure that vision is maintained, and they stick up for that, what they sold to the client. So that's a long answer to your question, but
no, I mean, it's a great answer to the question, because I mean, really, that is the thing that seems to be part of this broken chain that we have when it comes to providing a quality lighting control solution, is that the lighting designers sometimes will say, nope, I'm a pretty pictures person, I'm not going to touch the technicals. And that really does kind of beg the question of like, okay, but who's doing the technicals then? Who's going to take over that role and make sure that the lighting design is streamlined with the lighting controls design? And so in a lot of cases, that's where integrators in North America come in and really help with that, or sales reps come in and help with that, but it's still not like a complete picture. And so having the lighting designer take a bit of a stronger role would certainly help smooth that process over. And so from my understanding, lighting designers across the pond are much more tech savvy and much more focused. For instance, picking the actual driver that's going to come with the luminaire. And so just curious, from your perspective, is that really happening? Are you seeing a lot more movement in that?
I am. I mean, particularly in the larger agencies, I was chatting to some people at Arup, and they have multidisciplinary teams. So they have people who are more at the creative end, and they've got a colleague just sort of around the corner who they can hand over seamlessly to. And I think that clients are using multidisciplinary agencies because of that multi-specialism offer. But I think that the smaller agencies are starting to see that that's where they can be more nimble and continue to add value and charge good money, because the IT budget, you can start to nibble into the IT budget if you get into that bit. You move away from the sofas and the tapestry stuff into the technical dimensions of a building, and you can really start to find a business case for that. So, I mean, seeing some really interesting, I was reading some of the things on your website, actually. There's a really good guideline document about control specification, and I think that I'm seeing more and more young designers. I'm doing a lot of CPDs at the moment about lighting controls. What does that narrative look like? How far should you go? How do you convince or encourage a client to take ownership with you of that, so that even if they're not paying you to be at the table, they know what you had in mind? So I think that it's it's a big shift. I mean, really, only 5-10 years ago, smart lighting was just a glimmer in some kind of techie guy's eye, and now it's really everywhere. So I think it's a really interesting. It's a great time to work in this space, particularly if you have a bit of courage and humility to say, I'm not sure, but I think it's something to do.
So you had mentioned earlier a light lab that you had created. I'm very curious about that. Could you tell us some more about the light lab and how you use it?
So it was actually during lockdown. Oh, actually, no, before lockdown. I realised I trained as a glass artist, and I wanted to use light in my work. I couldn't find an electrician to help, so I trained as an electrician, and then I found myself surrounded by other artists who were going like, "What kind of light bulb should I get?" I mean, you mentioned color temperature. Is daylight, is that the right thing? And then between a panel and a point source, and also beginning more and more, I was working in sort of public engagement with science, so lots of people wanted stuff which blinked on and off sometimes. That whole back end of sensors and controls and Arduinos and all that stuff. They said, well, where do we even begin? And you go to a trade counter or you go online and they say, well, you've got to buy one. You're not going to tell you what it looks like until you get it. And I spent one very anxious Christmas waiting for a shipment from Asia, and the lights arrived for a big exhibition, and they were just hopelessly inadequate. It was awful, and that was a lot of money and a lot of time, and so it was just grim. So I thought, this isn't fair, and it's also environmentally catastrophic because most of us will have a drawer at home with stuff which didn't quite work. The base was the wrong shape, or it's the wrong color, or it's a different color to the other ones, or it flickers when you turn it on, or we've all got them, and the carbon footprint of that is just eye-watering and really not okay. So I set up a light library, so a space with lots of different kinds of lights, and people would lend me some and give me some, and people could come and have a play. And I ran workshops with artists to say, this is what you can do with a point source. This is what a 25-degree beam angle looks like. This is what tunable looks like. And so that it felt like it was great fun, but also a great center for conversations, because you can start to tell stories with light if you're able to choose different kinds to play with. And I think that was a gap for a long time, and I'm seeing a number of lighting manufacturers now, whether it be Urco or others, setting up sort of showrooms where you can they can see enough value in that to have a space where people can come and turn the knobs on the lights that they have. And I think that's what I did, and I still do that. I've got a bunch of lights here, and I'm often on the road with a couple of bags of lights to show people how this stuff works.
No, I think that's a fantastic resource. And honestly, I wish more light libraries existed, because I feel like we could all benefit from that. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I would be flipping through like cut sheets and being like, man, I wish I had my hands on this so I could actually see it and play with it and test it out. We're running a little bit out of time, not too much, but I just want to like recap everything that we've covered here so far, because I mean, it's all really fascinating stuff, and really, fantastic to have somebody like you in our industry who's really targeting all of this information and trying to disseminate it. What you do, I mean, you give guidance to those who are trying to achieve something lighting wise, whether it's, specific to a health or a behavioral concern, or it's just good lighting design in general. But you're trying to provide that bridging space between the design world and the end user world, which is so sorely needed. It's almost like you're an integrator for this design of lighting as opposed to an integrator of the actual fixtures. And so, it's really great to know that that's there. And additionally, you're doing a lot to demystify misconceptions, poor communication within our industry. We really have a bad practice of like grabbing a term and shoving it into a box and saying, okay, that's your box, that's where you belong. And then there's another niche out there that goes, no, but it's in this box. And so like, we need to have more people like you who are trying to say, whoa, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by human-centric lighting? Because, and to just kind of hit a little bit more on that, because like human-centric lighting is one of those terms that just in me, I get red flags immediately when I hear it. I'm like, okay, whoa, what are we talking about? But it's like just pulling it back, saying, hey, what specifically are you talking about when you say human centric? And so having those conversations really critical. And so the beginning of your process really is having that conversation in the beginning, saying, what is it that you want? Writing down a control intent narrative and really trying to strive to achieve that, so that at the end of the day, when you get to the actual installation and the end user walks in, they're satisfied and they have what they wanted to begin with. And there's another thing that we haven't really touched on as well here, which I'd love if you wouldn't mind just going a little bit into, which is the research that you do with the universities, and how do you test data and really make sure that what you're providing is meeting the goal of a project.
Yeah, great question. So I'm an independent, so I assemble teams to meet the needs of the project itself. And so one of the projects I'm working on is with Oxford University and a residential care provider, and together we raised the funding for a PhD student to measure before and after. She's going out there with her light meter at the minute as we install new lights. And then I brought in an amazing lighting designer, and then we built a special luminaire to deliver the light levels that Oxford decided were going to kind of allow us to deliver that stimulus. So we're characterizing the light in the room. We're looking at how these interventions change or don't, how much they change the quality of light in the room. So just I'm stepping back again from saying this should work. Does it? Which what's the active ingredient here? Then another project with the special needs schools. I've been working with MSc students. So we put out a call for a final year project for these students, and they take that project on and they bring their own methodology to it. And so there are many different ways to do that. And I always find academics are very keen to find ways to bring their work into the real world. So it really, another way that I work is to simply bring in a scientist or invite them to be an advisor on the project. So help to pose the question, how would we know if this worked? Is this to sense check the question? So all the academics that I've been fortunate enough to work with are, and another project I do is curate. So I just curated an online program with scientists and invited them to contribute their knowledge, and so that I can bring some of that knowledge to other places. So I find bridging different forms of evidence with different forms of experience and use it's an amazing time to be doing this work.
Absolutely, and critical too for us to really keep our standing in the industry. And so I think it's really super important to bring those experts in when you have a health goal, for instance, because again, that's why we stopped saying circadian in a lot of ways, because suddenly people were saying, whoa, you're talking about health. We shouldn't be doing that. We're not doctors. And it's like, yes, but that doesn't mean you just get to change the term and then ride off of that. Actually bring in the doctors. Let's bring those people in who know what they're talking about, can actually study this and tell us an answer. So I think that's fantastic. And I think that really is a good message for all lighting designers, is like, okay, if you have somebody who's looking for something specific and you personally don't know how to deliver that, ask for a professional to get involved.
Yeah. And 100 times out of 100, they are so keen to make sure that what is being promised can really be delivered, that we're not undermining the immense potential of lighting to support human outcomes by promising promising a miracle out of a product. I've got a giant database of people and connections and papers. So just get in touch. I'm always pleased to build those bridges. So yeah.
That's awesome. Wonderful. Absolutely fantastic conversation. And you're right. If everyone would just realize that we talk about this all the time. It takes a team to make all of this happen, right? Between the designer, the engineers, if you're in healthcare and you're involving some sort of medical professionals or scientists, bring the entire team to the table from the beginning, from day one, make them part of the conversation with the owner so that you can actually prove those results. You're not just talking about what you're trying to do. You can actually prove those results at the end. And I think that's super key and important. And if more people would just, when a designer gets brought one of these projects, they need to upfront, stand up and say, I need to bring in additional people for this to make sure we give you exactly what you need, because I'm not an expert in this field, but I can bring somebody in who can and be part of this team. And we really need to focus on a collaborative team effort for a lot of these projects and not just be so individualistic. And as soon as we start to do that, I think we'll really start to see a change in these projects. So,
Yep. I agree.
Shelley, thank you so much for a fantastic conversation today. Really appreciate your time and coming on the show with us. So thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it too.
I will just close out the show and remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association, and now also Light Fair. We will see you guys there in the spring.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, Lighting Controls Podcast. We have all of our episodes and a lot more. But until then, thank you for joining us. And Shelley, really appreciate you coming on the show. This was such a great conversation.